Okay, guys, we are live. Welcome to The Nerdy Christian. Here we discuss things media and culture, Christian faith and theology, world affairs, geopolitics, history, and all that fun nerdy stuff, and the interplay of all three of those things. So today we're discussing Imane Khelif and all of the controversy around that, but from a different angle than you might have considered before. So what I want to do, let's get live on Instagram too. Sorry. But what I want to address is I think Christians got duped. And not just on, not in a singular kind of manner, but I think on the spiritual warfare level, Christians got duped. We got had. We got played in a way that resulted in us discrediting our witness and harming non-Christians' perception of Christ. And so I want to address that a little bit in this video right here. So first things first, I'm going to let's just go to a clip I had last week. I did a video on the response to the Last Supper controversy, and I think that I still stand by it. I think that what was done was an intentional portrayal of the Last Supper in a way that was mocking and hedonistic and sacrilegious, and I don't think it was okay. But I said something in this video that in retrospect makes even more sense than it did when I said it. But let's go ahead and pop over. Let me share my screen. All right. And here we go. I'm not saying this is Thomas Jolly or any other individual person's intent in this, but we know, Ephesians 2:2, 1 Corinthians 4:4, we know that this world is under the dominion of powers against God. And very possibly there was an intent at that spiritual level among those here, okay? I think this might be a very tactical, intelligent move by spiritual forces that have long been fighting against Christians. Remember, Christian, Ephesians 6:12 tells us that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, and thus not against the drag performers, the people who are doing this, but is against spiritual forces, real present powers in this world, that they are behind the evil that we see done. This kind of antagonism and mockery of Christians is nothing new, and you need to be. And that's I didn't go into that in a ton of depth because it's pretty straightforward, but just Christians need to remember that anything that happens in this world, especially on a spiritual level, is not necessarily rooted in humans. I go on to talk about how Justin Martyr, he wrote about this mockery of Christians that was practiced by the cult of Mithras. He said, which the wicked devils have imitated in the mysteries of Mithras. So they were imitating the Eucharist. And he attributes that to demons. And basically, my whole point is that there is a spiritual chess game happening here. And if Christians aren't careful, you're going to get played. You have to be so discerning and so careful to recognize that the enemy is attempting to goad you into certain actions, certain words, certain reactions all of the time. Okay? Dark forces, spiritual reality, they're real. And he wants you to do certain things. And if you aren't on your guard, you're going to do those things. And you can love Jesus, and you can not even necessarily be doing immoral things and still fall for his traps and further his plans inadvertently, okay? So be aware of this. So what does this have to do with Imane Khelif? Well, I think my whole premise here is that this whole thing was planned on the spiritual level to discredit Christians. Think about this. Think about the Olympics controversy as a primer. It gets Christians outraged. It sets them on edge. It gets them distrusting and skeptical of the IOC in the first place and of their agendas and worldviews. And then this happens. Let's make sure the screen is sharing properly. Yep. Okay. So we all saw I mean, probably anyone saw this happen with Angela Carini bowing out of this fight last week, and you get people like Marjorie Taylor Greene calling Khelif a man. And the rumor spreads immediately that this is a man in women's boxing. That this is not a woman in women's boxing. Even a trans man is, or trans, what's the term that Ruslan uses, transformer, to not get caught by the censors on YouTube. Anyways, but that spread like wildfire. You can see this video, 3.2 million views, 57,000 likes, 15,000 retweets. Like, this narrative spread like crazy. And then the IBA had a conference this last week where they put forward some things. So let's dive into the IBA, who is the organization behind these claims. Let's dive into their claims, hear what they're saying, talk about their credibility, because that matters, and then talk about, even if they're correct in what they've said about this person, Imane Khelif, well, what does that even mean? Like, what can we pull from that, actually, okay? I'm going to take one moment just to check chat, because I haven't been watching chat right now. Oh, man. Guys, let's not talk about Zionism. That could be pretty anti-Semitic. We don't want none of that in here. Okay, so let's go ahead and play this video.
In a moment,
this is from an IBA conference that was hosted this Monday. That really said nothing new, but this is the latest from them.
we will hear from the General Secretary of the IBA, a man called Chris Roberts. Fairness and balance. We want to hear what he has to say. But I'll just caveat this first. The invite to myself and every other media organisation who may be here in Paris that wanted to attend, the IBA will give a detailed explanation of why they banned Imane Khelif and Lin Yuting from their World Championships in Delhi last year. Detailed explanation.
Detailed explanation.
On the 23rd of March, the results came
So now we should get incontrovertible evidence, right?
through, and it demonstrated the chromosomes that we refer to within the technical and competition rules that make both boxers ineligible. And that was then further ratified by the BOD, our board of directors. It was taken there to remove both boxers from the championships. We never intended to raise any of these issues at this event because this is not our event. This event belongs to the IOC. The whereabouts of this has come out based on the result of the bout between the Italian Angela Carini and Imane Khelif. I will point out that the president of the Italian Boxing Federation indeed hasn't been happy with previous results, and I would like to say that in this instance there was questions raised by the Italian Federation prior to her bout that took place. We're not able to disclose the results of any tests, but you can read between the lines where that sits. And of course, what I'd also like to mention here is that yesterday evening and this morning we've received letters from the NOCs in Chinese Taipei and Algeria respectively informing us that we can't disclose any information pertinent to either boxer.
So Geraint, he promised us a detailed...
Okay, so like nothing new there. They say that they have XY chromosomes, and that's about it. And hear out this reporter's response, just from a journalism perspective.
explanation. So my question to you is, was that it?
Your father knows about saving
ads.
money.
All right,
Everything I'm wearing, I've had since boot camp.
All right.
Pretty much, yeah. Chris Roberts caveated at the end saying, read between the lines. Well, you can't on such a sensitive subject. When we were asked, we were told we were going to get a detailed explanation. We understand. Everybody in that room who is a trained journalist understands about medical privacy and the need for that. However, there was just an acceptance of, from their point of view, that proof that they had taken two tests, one in 2022 and one in 2023. We do not know what those tests were. We're told they're from a laboratory in Istanbul and one in Delhi. Yes, there may be proof of a test, but we don't know what the tests were and we don't know what the results were. So how can you have a detailed explanation? What is the point? What was the point of today other to add more confusion upon an extremely sensitive, difficult to understand and damaging subject matter. Whether you're interested in the boxes involved or not, it just seemed to add more confusion and chaos to the situation we've had here in Paris for the last 5-6 days.
Well, I know Khelif spoke herself, so...
The author of Confusion and Chaos is not God. Okay. So this article from the AP has, it's titled Boxing Group Answers Some Questions but Raises Many More About Tests on Imane Khelif and Lin Yuting. I want to highlight some points here that, one, the IBA is still refusing to disclose nearly all details about the tests and their methodologies. So we don't know the facts. Perhaps these two individuals have XY chromosomes. They might. And in that case, there are things to be considered, but that still doesn't make them a man per se, which we'll get into in a moment. But the IBA said it tested Khelif and Lin in response to complaints from other teams, apparently acknowledging an uneven standard of profiling that is considered widely unacceptable in sports. This is critical to note. Like in sports, you have to have standards and procedures, right? You say you have uniformity. You say everyone is treated in this way. These are the rules. You can't just spontaneously single people out for these kinds of things, especially because, as we'll see in a moment, the IBA was suspended in part because they were caught match fixing before. So in the context of what happened, Imane Khelif actually beat a Russian boxer in this competition. This was an undefeated Russian boxer. Then suddenly they want to do tests on her, and they say that those tests reveal she has XY chromosomes, and they disqualify her, and thus disqualify her victory against this previously undefeated Russian boxer, and now that Russian boxer is still undefeated. Can you see why this is problematic? Especially because the results of the tests, nor even the kinds of tests that were administered, were never shared. So let's further go on. Here's another thing. IBA President Umar Krimlev, an acquaintance of Russian President Vladimir Putin, who spoke on Apache Zoom from Russia, then said through a translator that the test showed elevated levels of testosterone. The astute among you will recognize that is what they explicitly denied before. It appears in direct contradiction with an IBA statement from July 31st when it said Khelif and Lin did not undergo a testosterone examination but were subject to a separate and recognized test, whereby the specifics remain confidential. This guy is completely what's the phrasing I'm looking for here? Everything he says is just not legitimate. It's not worthy of trusting, okay? Roberts, who is second in command to Krimlev at the IBA, repeatedly said that observers should read between the lines about the test while declining to give more details. We just heard that there. You can't tell people to read between the lines. That's like super conspiracy propaganda-ish. That's not legitimate. Now, the IBA subsequently said they give $3.1 million in prizes to top Olympic performers this summer, basically trying to wage this culture war, saying well, if the IOC is going to be corrupt, we're going to reward these people with money. I'd ask you, dear viewer, where do you think they got $3.1 million? This organization sponsored or run by a Russian oligarch and who is familiar with Putin, which we'll touch on in a moment, and previously sponsored by Gazprom, a Russian state-owned oil company. Where do you think they got this $3.1 million? The Italian Boxing Association said Sunday that it won't accept the IBA's money, while the father of quarterfinalist Pila Kaivo-Oja, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, I'm sorry, of Finland, said Monday that his daughter also wouldn't accept it. It is quite clear that Putin's money is not to be taken, she told the Helsingin Sanomat newspaper. I'm sorry, I just don't know how to pronounce her name, so I'm not gonna try again. But you guys, even these people are recognizing that there's some potential bad players here. Anyone who is portrayed like Khelif has been portrayed would feel angry and frustrated. This was said by a friend of hers and teammate of hers. She has been affected by everything as anyone would, but she will do her talking in the ring. Just a reminder that there are real people in this situation. So let's talk about the IBA a little bit more. So who are the IBA? So this is the situation that led to Imane Khelif's disqualification in the first place. She beat that Russian boxer, Azelia Ameneva, who I talked about, previously unbeaten. She then had to complete unspecified eligibility tests. So who knows what it was? And they say, you're disqualified. That's sketchy. I'm sorry, but that is sketchy. Now, as the IOC points out, these two athletes were the victims of a sudden and arbitrary decision by the IBA. Such an approach is contrary to good governance. That is correct. That is true. Good governance would posit that all athletes must complete the same testing as a prerequisite. Okay, you have to meet certain standards. In some sports, it's testosterone levels. In some sports, maybe you can say XY chromosomes. I'm not here to tell you what the boundaries should or should not be, but I am telling you that the boundaries need to be uniformly applied and tested for good governance. Okay. Now, AIBAs, so here's how they fell out of favor with the Olympics. 6 years ago, they elected President Gafur Rakimov, an Uzbek businessman described by the U.S. Treasury Department as an organized crime boss. This guy was involved in like heroin trade. Come on, guys. And then they changed the name and elected Krimlev, who is an acquaintance of Vladimir Putin. He introduced Gazprom as the biggest sponsor of the IBA and moved the IBA's operations to Russia. This was not cool. They stripped the IBA's Olympic credentials and ran the past two Olympic boxing tournaments with a task force that includes the Tokyo Olympics and these current Olympics. This points out Krimlev has made additional allegations about the gender of both fighters without providing proof, and people across the world have accepted his word. That's unbelievably frustrating to veteran boxing executives like Boren van der Vost, the Dutch businessman leading world boxing. Van der Vost said, it's not very respectful for the boxers who are competing here to Chinese Taipei, which is Taiwan, and Algeria to speak about them in these terms. That's what I'm trying to stress. And then, last of all, even if this was legitimate, there's just no way to know for sure. But this guy is not like a legitimate source. Krimlev, he's just not. So, like, it's worth noting the IBA was banned after the 2016 Olympics, partially because of a match-fixing scandal in those Olympics. They have fixed matches before, you guys. And here's more, just showing that after they were allowed to conduct their tests, he said it was testosterone that disagreed with their stuff. There's just so much here. Now, let's shift gears a little bit to like, what if it's all true? What if they do? Well, first, I just want you guys to know, before we shift gears, actually, Russia was banned from this year's Olympics. Russia has a bone to pick, okay? They want to see... Russia, here's a few things you need to know. Russia has the most sophisticated PSYOPs operation probably in the world. I remember back in 2016, I read a headline about there had been these protests about gun rights that were organized on Facebook. And there was a protest and a counter-protest organized by different Facebook groups. And it turned out upon investigation that both Facebook groups were tied to one Russian agency manipulating people, right? So both the protesters and the counter-protesters were being puppeted by people in Russia who are paid good money by their government to sow division, okay? Now, that's important to recognize, that Russia's aim for the West and Satan's aim for Christians is division, is hostility, is chaos, is anger and outrage, okay? The state of Russia and the spiritual entity of Satan are aligned in that way. They want hate and outrage abounding in our world. So, let's actually shift gears to talk about the IBA's definition of male and female. You have XX chromosomes or XY chromosomes. So many people got on my posts on Instagram this last week and are like, nope, he has XY chromosomes. We need to talk about DSDs. We need to educate Christians on genetics and on science and how this stuff works, okay? DSDs, differences in sex development, are a group of rare conditions involving genes, hormones, and reproductive organs, including genitals. It means a person's sex development is different to most other people's. Now, there are a few different DSDs, which this person, Imane Khelif, if she does have an XY chromosome, which are XY chromosomes, which we don't know, but if she does, there are a few different ones she could have that do not necessarily impart upon her a material, unfair physical advantage. She could have androgen insensitivity syndrome, where the body ignores androgens or is insensitive to them. So then it wouldn't even matter what her testosterone levels are because she can't benefit from testosterone in the same way as a man. And she would have a female body because if she has complete AIS, CAIS, because her body was never given the androgens to lead to the development of male parts, right? Even though she had XY chromosomes. Swyer syndrome, similarly, people with Swyer syndrome have female external parts and some female internal reproductive structures. These individuals usually have a uterus and fallopian tubes, but their gonads are not functional. Since when do Christians define gender as, hey, you know what, you can get pregnant, but you're a man? What? Because some of these people having a uterus and such can get pregnant. Now, they usually would need donated eggs or something, but still, they can carry a baby to term and birth it because they have a female body despite having XY chromosomes. How does that work? I'm glad you asked. Let's listen to a doctor right here and then 2 videos on the way that genetics contribute to, they usually determine sex, but do not define it because of the way genetics work. But first, let's hear out this doctor.
The difference between male and female and subsequent gender identity is as simple as having or not having an X chromosome. Then please stick around and watch this video to try and learn a little bit about this crazy controversy that's going on in the Olympic world. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Suter, and my goal in this channel is to help teach you about the medical side of the sports world. I'm actually in Paris right now. I've been here for the Olympics the past week or so. You can see Paris outside my window there. It's been absolutely beautiful. But the biggest story the past couple days has been, of course, with women's boxing. The story, of course, is that this Algerian boxer, Imane Khelif, is identifying as a woman. She's in female women's boxing, but there's a lot of talk that people saying she's a male. She's had these previous disqualifications for having XY chromosomes and failed gender testing. And so why in the world are we letting a man compete in a women's sport, especially boxing? This is not the first time we've seen a big story like this. You might remember this track and field athlete, Caster Semenya, who was a middle distance runner who was disqualified from running certain events because of this whole differences in sexual development diagnosis and picture. This is going to be as simple as possible of an embryology or the study of how we grow and develop, genetics and physiology lesson, so I can try to open people's mind to some of these challenging discussion points. Our genes are the blueprint for how our body functions and is built and is made. We get 1/2 of our genes from our mother and 1/2 from our father. That means most humans will have 2 genes for sex. That can be either an X chromosome or a Y chromosome. Now, typically a female sex will have an X and an X chromosome, and a male sex will have an X and a Y. The contents of those chromosomes are what determine how we are going to develop either into a female, talking about sex again, or a male, again, talking about sex. So classic female sex, XX, classic male sex, XY. Now, interestingly, whenever we are first conceived in the womb, we all start off and we have the potential for our sexual organs, our gonads, to be either female or male. The presence of specific genes on the Y chromosome differentiate that down a pathway to become male. So without that Y chromosome turning on the pathway to become male, everybody would go down the female path in terms of their sexual development. So if you have a normal functioning Y chromosome, that turns on the pathway to send you down to have male sexual characteristics, male genitalia, etc. That's the basic black and white kind of bread and butter of how things normally go. But as you can imagine, there are a lot of possible errors in not only the genetic composition, but also what happens from the downstream physiology standpoint. On that Y chromosome is a specific gene that turns on a lot of the testosterone, the androgen signaling pathways that form the gonads, the external and internal sexual characteristics. So we're talking about the external signs like breast, gonads, etc., versus the internal genetics. With these differences or disorders of sexual differentiation, or DSD, the genetics are XY, so you have that Y chromosome that's trying to turn on the pathway to fully have those male characteristics, but there's abnormalities that don't give the normal male gonads, male hormone profiles. So what you are left with is a very convoluted, very complicated picture of varying degrees of both physiology from a hormone standpoint to external physical characteristics that are what we see when we look at somebody to make us think male or female in the traditional sense. Oftentimes with these athletes, that results in higher levels of testosterone that gives them more of this athletic advantage. But because they have any variety of all these different genetic enzymes, testosterone hormonal dysregulations and abnormalities, they might not have the exact same external features, or what we call phenotype, that would make us classically think of somebody as male or female. So you can have these individuals who might look more masculine than a female, but whenever they were born, their external genitalia wasn't clearly male or clearly female. And then you can imagine all the stress and anxiety and everything that comes downstream of that when you don't have clearly male or female features. This is not always a black and white thing. And these DSD syndromes, these disorders, are far more common than you would think. These are not like 1 in a million types of things. And if you think of an athletic population where any sort of physiologic advantage might make you rise to the top, there's actually probably a high number of these individuals that are high-level athletes because they have had that boost in their physiology. But it's no fault to them. I really encourage people to try and be open-minded and learn or read more about this, because again, it is not as simple as saying so-and-so has an X chromosome, so therefore they are male. There is a lot of potential ambiguity that is no fault to the athlete or that individual. This is a really nice little review paper on PubMed that talks about all of these disorders of sexual differentiation. And if we scroll through, I mean, these are all the genes that play a role. This SRY gene is kind of that sex determining part we talked about with the Y chromosome. It's the main male regulator. But you can have abnormalities in that. I mean, all of these different genetic abnormalities that could result in downstream variation. There's so much gray area in this. And so to simplify the question of this Algerian boxer and say, well, she has a Y chromosome, so therefore she absolutely is male, it is not that simple. It is very, very complicated trying to determine the difference there when you get these DSD individuals. Different sports have different ways of managing this. Track and field has tried to look at some different testosterone levels where you have to be below a certain threshold to compete in certain events that they feel you have a high competitive advantage. But there's no consistency across the sports world in terms of how these athletes are managed and handled when it comes to a sport and differentiation that has been historically male and female. I don't know the answer to this. I'm not going to act like I know the answer for how you handle these athletes who, again, at no fault to their own, are in this really difficult situation where their whole life they have not clearly looked or felt in the classic sense that we think of as male or female. They want to do sports. They want to be athletic. Maybe they're really good at their sports, and so that's a good outlet for them. But then they get further on in life and we discover this thing and we run into these questions of male and female. So think of putting yourself in that woman's shoes. I don't think necessarily that this Algerian boxer is trying to like deceive the system and just win gold medals. But think about being a child and having one of these known diagnosed differences in sexual differentiation syndromes where you don't look like your friends who are female or male. You feel different because of your hormone levels. How are you supposed to put those people in a box of purely male or female? Again, I don't know the solution. I don't know the answer, but I wish that we all had the intellectual maturity to not just see these headlines, not see the way somebody looks, and automatically assume that just because we are told they have a chromosome, they must be male or they must be female. And again, we're talking about from that sexual side effect, because I think there are a lot of other gender identity things that factor into this as well with how you're raised and the psychology of it. So it's a very, very complex situation. So the basics, you get one set of chromosomes for each parent. Classic males have an X and a Y, classic females have an X and an X. All of us start down the same pathway with potential to be either female or male from a sexual organ, sexual characteristic standpoint, but the presence of some genes on the Y chromosome send that classically down the pathway male. However, abnormalities in that Y chromosome, potentially an extra chromosome, I didn't even mention that, Klinefelter, where you can have more than just those two chromosomes, send us down these pathways where you have abnormal phenotype, meaning abnormal physical characteristics, and abnormal physiology that don't clearly put us in the male or female box. That's it for the video. I hope this was helpful. Again, I'm not really trying to take sides here. Like I said, I don't have the answer. I'm just trying to give you a little bit more unbiased thought behind all this so that we don't rush to make such harsh judgments and assumptions when we don't really know the full story. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
So I hope that helped you guys understand this a little bit better, is that you can have people born with XY chromosomes whose bodies do not, in whom those Y chromosomes don't properly send these signals to develop a male body, and you end up with someone who is genetically male. It's funny, actually, right here I have in the recommended like a video from Brett Cooper that says the thumbnail is biologically male, and that's just like a misnomer here, you guys, because these people with DSD, depending on their DSD condition, there are a wide variety of them, can be born genetically male with a female body. And that, I think, is what is just like introducing cognitive dissonance for Christians, because I think they want to be able to like just make these two binary things of like, which I would say gender is a binary, but they want to have it like XY, man, XX, woman, end of story, that's it. And that's just not the way that the science works. So let's hear more about how what is the play between the genetic gender and the rest of your biology, the body, like your body's gender. And then which gender would you say people should live into? Because I think people should live into their anatomical gender. But, and again, the full narrative here is I'm trying to talk about a way that I think Christians got hoodwinked by dark powers here, because they were uneducated or ignorant of certain ways that these things work, and they got primed by everything that happened at the Olympics before with the Last Supper controversy, and now we're easily swept into this outrage machine over Imane Khelif's situation without actually truly understanding it. I want to help you understand it so that we don't get hoodwinked by the enemy and duped into something that I'll show at the end has caused Christians to be perceived in a poor light. Okay.
The second reason why the mechanisms that determine sex cannot be used as the definition for sex is because random mutations or genetic errors can occur. Sometimes sex determination mechanisms result in a sex opposite of what you'd expect from the chromosomes. For example, in humans, 1 in 20,000 males are born with XX chromosomes, rather than the typical XY. This occurs when the SRY gene, the gene that triggers differentiation into a male, translocates onto an X chromosome during cell division in the father's sperm cells. When the fetus is conceived, they receive 2 X chromosomes, and 1 with the SRY gene. SRY then triggers a cascade of genes leading to male development, gonadal differentiation into testes, which then leads to the development of male internal and external genitalia. Though they cannot produce sperm, since this requires the AZF region from the Y chromosome, XX males are defined as male because they develop the body plan that produces sperm, determined by genetics. Defining this person as female simply because of the XX chromosomes would be absurd, because they develop the body plan that produces sperm, not eggs. Thus, because sex determination mechanisms vary across species and can result in genetic errors during development, they cannot be used as the definition for sex. It should now be clear that males and females are not defined by the mechanisms that develop them in the womb. They are defined by the body plans that produce either sperm or eggs. For humans, this is determined by genetics. Defining sex as this way does not mean sex is a spectrum or that one can change sex. Sex is determined at conception by the individual's genetic profile, developed in the womb and immutable. If we wish to ascertain the full picture of a person's sex, we must analyze their genetically determined body plan, the structures that produce and release either gamete type. Defining male and female with respect to gamete type is the only way forward for an accurate and consistent definition of sex.
So there's that perspective on this, and this same organization made another video about intersex, and I want to dive into that because they give a really good explanation here.
So if neither variation of sex characteristics nor...
Also, it's worth noting that these videos, this one's 4 years ago, this other one's 1 year ago, these are not being made in response to this situation. This is a bigger conversation that Christians, I feel like, are coming too late because of this outrage machine. Like, this is something that it would be good for us to become aware of so that we don't equip people who want gender to be a spectrum to argue against us, and instead have our definitions down and properly get this. Because I have already seen some left-leaning reporting and different stuff point to like why this just shows that gender can't be binary, that it is a spectrum, and I'm just like, no, that's not the takeaway here. But Christians need to be equipped to properly respond to that.
Personal identity defines the category of sex, then how can we define it? The answer is simple. The category of biological sex is defined through what developmental pathway you went down for the production of either sperm or eggs, the 2 and only 2 gamete types. Gamete production is supported through what dominant gonadal tissue you have, testes or ovaries, in their respective reproductive structures, Wolffian or Müllerian. The differentiation and development of both the gonads and reproductive structures are determined through the action of 2 mechanisms. 1, the function of the SRY gene, and 2, the function of androgen receptors. While there are multiple pathways for sex differentiation and development, there are only 2 endpoints, male or female. If you have both a functional SRY gene and functional androgen receptors, you will almost always develop as a male. On the other hand, if you do not have both of these mechanisms working together, such as an absence of SRY or insensitive androgen receptors, then you will almost always develop as a female. In this way, biological sex is determined through a sequential coordination of mutually antagonistic mechanisms, which activate the primary sex pathway of development and block the opposite sex pathway.
I want to point out that it's been speculated by many that Imane Khelif may have Swyer syndrome or CAIS, and I can't speak for certain. I'm not a geneticist. I don't know the details of CIAS. Or no, I don't know the details of Swyer in terms of how it's caused, but I know CAIS, which we talked about here, that causes one's androgen receptors to be inert, not to work. So, according to this guy, who I would say seems pretty unbiased, 4 years ago, that would make Imane Khelif a biological woman. So stop calling her a him.
Thus, sex is binary, defined through the two gametes, sperm or egg. There is no third option. To understand this, let's look at how the process works in the womb. In early development, we all start out with two internal reproductive structures that will differentiate and develop based on the SRY gene and androgens. Around the 8th week of gestation, the presence or absence of the SRY gene differentiates the bipotential gonads into either male or female tissue. If SRY is present, the bipotential gonads form into testes. As the testes develop, they release hormones for the development of the male internal reproductive structure, Wolffian. As the male structure develops further and the testes release hormones, the female structure, Mullerian, disintegrates. On the other hand, if SRY is absent, the bipotential gonads form into ovaries. As the ovaries develop, there is no anti-Mullerian hormone present to block female development. Then, the Mullerian structure develops further, and the male structure, Wolffian, disintegrates. Thus, the SRY gene is the on-off switch which determines your gonadal differentiation, and therefore, your biological sex. So, what about intersex? Well, this is where things get more complicated, but the endpoint of male or female remains the same. Intersex is an umbrella term which represents more than 40+ medical conditions, each with their own specific developmental pathways. Such complexity will be explored later, but for now, all we need to know is that most individuals classified as intersex have typical gonadal differentiation into either testes or ovaries, and have typical Wolffian or Mullerian structures, and are therefore either male or female. So, if intersex individuals are males and females like everyone else, then why are they considered in between, ambiguous, or a third sex? The answer is due to the lack of knowledge about intersex. For instance, intersex females can have typical gonadal differentiation, but differences in development of their genitalia, such as a fused labia and enlarged clitoris, a condition known as congenital adrenal hyperplasia. And yet, they are still females because they have ovaries, a Mullerian structure, and no SRY gene. Consider another case, where gonadal differentiation and development are both atypical. Intersex females who have the SRY gene but lack functional androgen receptors will have female morphology, a condition known as complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. And
There
yet,
it is.
even though these individuals have the SRY gene, they lack functional androgen receptors, and the male pathway of development does not proceed. Thus, they are females. On the other hand, intersex males who have typical gonadal differentiation with differences in reproductive development can sometimes develop breast tissue and have smaller testes, a condition known as Klinefelters, which results in a duplicate of the X, and yet they are still males because they have testes, a Wolffian structure, the SRY gene, and functional androgen receptors. For more complex intersex conditions, a case-specific analysis of their developmental pathway is needed, a topic for a future video. But
All right, and that I mean gets at it. Like, that is how that is what Christians need to understand about why genetic gender, XX or XY, does not define someone's gender. It's not Imane Khelif, just because she does have XY chromosomes. If she does, because we haven't had that confirmed by any evidence, but if she does, that does not make her a man. She can still have a female body with a variety of different conditions that would allow for that, okay? Now, let's talk about this third point of, okay, if she is intersex, if she does have a DSD condition, does that give her an unfair physical advantage? Well, let's look at her record here. She has, let's see. Dang it, this one. Okay, yeah, 37. So 37 wins, 9 losses. Only 5 of her wins have been KOs, which is a meaningful point to note. But 9 losses. This is not some person. This is a good boxer. This is not someone who's undefeatable. This is not Leah Thomas. This is not a man clearly competing in a woman's sport and smoking everyone. 9 losses is meaningful, okay? Now, it's worth noting that so 5 knockouts and hasn't lost a bout since 2022. So she seems to be like in her mojo. But check this out. I was curious. I was like, what's a usual knockout ratio? Like, what if this was a man who's like, as Kalini said, like, I've never been punched like that in my life. So if this was someone with, not even who is a man, but even someone with an unfair physical advantage who's like super strong and just smacking, like absolutely smacking her opponents, and has this unfair advantage of masculine strength due to a genetic variance, like, shouldn't she be just knocking women out left and right instead of only having 5 KOs? Is that typical that one would only have less than, let's see, 40, so only about 10%, a little over 10%, I think that's probably 12% of her wins as KOs? You would expect more, because check this out. This person, Christina Hammer, 24-0. She's never had any losses. And 11 of those came by knockout. Almost half of her wins came by knockout. And this whole article is about how women's boxing is 2-minute rounds instead of 3 minutes, and how this woman is like against that because she's like, I'm a big girl. Like, it's done to protect women, but she's like, women can compete in the sport in like by the same standards as men, just against women. Like, you don't need to protect us in this sport that we're willingly participating in, which is a whole nother point. I think a lot of what is protect women is really just sexism, especially as we saw with Imane Khelif, where people are saying this woman doesn't look female. It's ridiculous. Anyways, though, this person, Cecilia Brækhus, 9 knockouts, 38-0. So she has a very similar amount of fights at the time of this article to Imane Khelif, 38 instead of 37, but more than twice as many knockouts. Like this person, Brooklyn Serrano, or Serrano, she has 36 wins and 27 KOs. Holy cannoli. That's a lot of knockouts. Like, Taylor, 13 wins, 6 knockouts. Like, guys, this 5 knockouts, that does not point to a material physical advantage. Okay, let's be real. Like, anyone who knows boxing, if I can find this out from a cursory glance, anyone who knows boxing certainly would know this is not an advantage. And all that to say, like, the most important thing to remember is that this is a person. Like, stuff like this is unacceptable. This is disgusting. Like, this person on Twitter, 10 million views, 4.3 thousand likes, 1.9 thousand reshares, pointing to Imane Khelif's crotch. And again, here. Like, and I saw so many posts like this. I'm just going to close that out because I don't even like looking at that. It grosses me out that someone would do that to a woman. That's not okay. So Imane Khelif faced all sorts of bullying like that, like what Marjorie Taylor Greene said, like what so many people, millions of people, shared all around the internet in criticism of her, and she had some words to say in a recent interview.
لم أستطع التحكم في أعصاب تاعي لأنه بعد الضجة الإعلامية وبعد الفوز كانت في نفس الوقت فرحة وفي نفس الوقت تأثر كبير لأنه وش صار حاجة مش سهلة حاجة تمس كرامة الإنسان وهذا الشيء اللي أثر فيا أثناء نهاية المنازل هذا هو
like, come on, guys, something that harms human dignity, and that affected me at the end of the match. Like, come on, can you not see how we Christians and those of us in the West who called her trans and did this stuff harmed this woman in a real way and tarnished the gospel with our criticality and lies and slander, which is a violation of the 9th commandment, by the way.
السؤال اللي راني نطرح فيه نفسي أنا بحد ذاتي نقول علاش حتى الآن لماذا حتى الآن يصرى هذا الشيء ما على باليش أنا مهم جيت هنايا مركزة على الهدف تاعي وهو الأولمبياد اليوم راني في نصف النهائي إن شاء الله نكون في الموعد في نصف النهائي إن شاء الله يوفقني ربي ونقدر نتحكم في الأمور وباش نجتاز هذه المرحلتين والمرحلة النصف النهائي. أنا نوجه رسالتي لكامل شعوب العالم أنهم يكونوا متمسكين بالمبادئ الأولمبية حسب الميثاق الأولمبي، والابتعاد عن التنمر على جميع الرياضيين، لأنه هذا الشيء يأثر ويأثر كثير وكثير، وقادر يدمر ناس حتى يقتل تفكير وذهن ناس ويفرق شعوب. أود أن أشكر كل من ساندني، كل الجزائريين والجزائريات، كل شعب العالم العربي، كل العالم بأسره اللي وقف معي في هذه الحملة الشرسة ضدي.
I'm just saying too, she sounds like a woman to me.
أنا نتواصل مع العائلة.
Here's another bit where she talks about her family's experience in the midst of all this.
نتواصل مع العائلة تاعي يومين تقريبا في الأسبوع. إن شاء الله ما يكونوش تأثروا بزاف، وهما راهم متقلقين عليا أنايا. إن شاء الله هذه الأزمة هذه تتوج إن شاء الله بميدالية ذهبية ويكون أحسن رد إن شاء
الله. Look. It's just not fair to see a woman and judge on her appearance whether she's allowed to be a woman or not. Check this out from her recent fight. This was not her most recent, but the one before that. You can see the emotion that she's just experiencing in the midst of this. It's not fair for any woman to face such slander over unverified claims in the. I'm not gonna lie, it makes me really mad how so many Christians have treated this woman. And something interesting worth noting. This is Amy Broadhurst. She beat Imane Khelif before, and she has stood up and supported Imane Khelif. She wrote in this tweet, have a lot of people texting me over Imane Khelif. Personally, I don't think she has done anything to cheat. I think it's the way she was born, and that's out of her control. The fact that she has been beaten by 9 females before says it all. She went on to tweet again later in support of Imane. Let's see where, right here. Can't imagine what she's going through. The public are destroying her, and these are the results. Keep the head high, champ. Like, she punched her. She would know. She got punched by her. She would know if that felt like an unfair advantage. She didn't complain. She just beat her when she fought her. And that, I think, should have been Kalini's response instead of stepping out right away and just like, oh, no. It's just not fair how she was treated. Like, ultimately, guys, remember that when this is a woman. I'm sorry. But it's female on her birth certificate. She's been immensely bullied. It's not fair to place any woman under such scrutiny and hate.
وأنا طويل العالم كله يشهد أني تعبت لسنوات وسنوات نادي هذا الفوز كامل الشعب الجزائري نشكر كاع الجالية اللي كامل قاعد يجاو اللي شقاو اللي تعبوا كامل واحد جزائري كامل واحد في العالم يساندني قضية عائلة قضية شرف وقضية كل الجزائر نوجه لهم تحية نقول لهم برافو لكم انتم هذه الميدالية عاونتوني انتم فيها وتحية الجزائر تحية الجزائر تحية الجزائر المزيد من التفوق راني بزاف فرحانة بهذا.
So this is after she won at least bronze, but that like her saying like this is a matter of honor for her now, like she is defending her honor, her womanhood. And like Christians, here's why it's so important we get this right. Here's a perspective from a critical non-Christian.
Who was born as a woman and identifies as. So conservatives are mad because a woman who was born as a woman and identifies as a woman is competing in women's sports. Got it. So
Like, the whole point of the perception that the world is having of us Christians is that we are hypocrites and have a double standard on gender, because we want someone to align with their physical gender, their body's gender, until we find out, oh, you have a XY chromosome. Well, now you can't be a woman anymore. You have to be a man. I've seen thousands of Christians saying stuff like this. I would bet it's millions. Definitely millions. Calling this woman a he, refusing to call her a she, which is so ironic to me, because do you realize you are essentially arguing for a biological woman, a woman with a female body, anatomical body. The only way in which she is not biologically female is her genetics, but every other factor of her biology is female. You are arguing for her to have to gender transition to male. That's the whole woke leftist perspective. They want people to be able to identify as whatever they want and transition to it. Like, Christians have gone so far on this that they've come around to taking the liberal perspective, which blows my mind, you guys. And it's a hypocrisy that's being called out by the world very plainly. And for the sake of our legitimacy and just the perception of our faith and of Christ in the world, we need to get this better, get this right. Really, here's like in summary, kind of what I think about what happened here and why I think this was a spiritual move. So, the Last Supper happens. Like, Christians, we're playing checkers. Satan's playing 4D chess. Luckily, we have a God who's playing like quantum realm chess in 7D. Like, it, he just is gonna smoke Satan all the way, all the time. But us Christians can get individually, ourselves, we can get outplayed for sure. And so here's what I think happened. Dark powers manipulate situations to where the Last Supper thing happens and Christians display outrage. Somewhat justifiably, it was a mockery, but by the world, we begin to get castigated as there's this kind of bait and switch of them saying, oh no, it wasn't really the Last Supper. So we kind of get discredited a little bit by those who are willing to listen to that perspective. But I would say if we had only responded with less outrage and just more expressed our frustration in a calm manner, that might not have even gotten flipped on us so easily. But that happens. But that primes us. That primes us with a distrust, a skepticism, an anger towards the IOC. And then Friday, Imane Khelif fights. Khalini drops out, basically immediately. Points to, basically infers that Khelif is a man. And Christians lose their minds. And they begin to slander a woman. And I've heard a lot of people say, well, you can't blame people for just not knowing. No, I can. Because here's the thing, Christian. If someone in your world, your bubble, tells you something about someone else with no verifiable proof, and you go and tell someone else that thing about them, that's called a rumor. That's called slander. That's called gossip. And it is a sin. It is a sin. Gossip is one of the most toxic sins all throughout, thoroughly embedded in many Christian circles and activities and groupings. Do not further gossip. It is wrong. And it's so important that we remember that. Believe things that are verifiably true, especially about people. This is not the first, nor will it be the last time in which Christians believe slander about someone without confirming it for themselves. And every time that Christians do so, the enemy wins that fight. Okay? Megan Basham's book that's out, I will be reading soon, but I already know that some of the slander in there is not true. Some of the things said about people like Gavin Ortland, not true. Okay? So Christians, when we slander people, when we gossip, when we buy into lies, especially lies that are easily debunked, we discredit ourselves. We come across to the world as those foolish Christians eager to fight culture wars, who don't really care, who don't really love anyone, who hate Imane Khelif and hate people who they can't understand, and it doesn't further the gospel or make our case or help the world to better perceive or understand Christianity and Christ, our Savior, and the gospel we wish to share with the world. And that's what I want to leave you with, is that spiritual forces are at play here. You need to use discernment in all things in your life and avoid falling into their traps, because they will do all sorts of different feints and goading and tricks and all sorts of misinformation and all sorts of stuff to try to make you take steps that God would not have for you, that God would not desire for you to take. Avoid those tricks, okay? Be wise to them. Act with discernment. Be slow to speak. Be very slow to speak if it derides or denigrates someone. Do not fall into slander, gossip, or misinformation. And with that, let's check the chats. Anyone got anything in the chat? I think we're pretty clear. Yeah, thanks you guys for joining. Thanks everybody who joined. Really appreciate having you as always. I hope that this was informative for you. Feel free to leave questions or anything in the comments. For those of you joining from TikTok or Instagram, this video in full will be up on YouTube under the live tab on The Nerdy Christian Pod, at the Nerdy Christian Pod. The channel is The Nerdy Christian. And yeah, feel free to listen to the whole thing, and I hope you find it informative. But you guys have a great day, and thank you all for joining.